Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the show. Fernando.
Welcome to the show.
What do we have today? We have a 2018 Honda Accord with the 10-speaker factory premium sound system. This stuff here. Tweeter, mid-range. There's a center channel back there. In the rear deck, he has a subwoofer. There's two mid-range on either side. Way back there in the corner, way back here, there's another tweeter. That's two sets of components and a whole bunch of other speakers. That means that there's an amplifier in here somewhere and we have to locate it. Today, the plan is to show you how to integrate into this car. Now, we're putting a whole bunch of stereo in it. We're gonna fill all the holes. But before we can do any of that, we need to do a ton of testing to figure out what the heck is going on and what products we're gonna need to do the integration into this. But to start, one of the new things we do is polarity test to see what the factory is doing to the audio. So let's get started. Driver's front tweeter is in polarity. Let's check the mid bass. We're good there. Let's check the passenger side. Always check both driver and passenger side. Just don't assume because it's in polarity on this side, it's gonna be in polarity on that side. What a lot of manufacturers have started to do is put one tweeter out of polarity with everything to add like a fake time alignment. It's really strange. In some cases it actually works though. We're good here. All right, the mid bass in the door is good as well. We'll head to the rear deck and check those as well. Rear mid bass is in polarity.
Tweeter 2.
Subwoofer's in polarity. Passenger's good. Both passengers are in polarity. The center is in polarity with the mid bass in the door. Now that we know that all the factory speakers are moving in polarity with each other, we kind of don't have to worry about it past that point. Now the reason why we check is because in some cases, the tweeters are out of polarity with the mid bass. The reason why they're probably doing that is they're using a 12 dB crossover slope, crossed over at the same frequency, meaning the tweeter stops and the mid-range begins at the same point. When you use a 12 dB crossover slope, you can get a huge dip at that crossover point. Sometimes up to 3 dBs less sound. So in order to fix that, you put the tweeter 180 degrees out of phase with the mid bass, and that solves that issue. The next thing on our list is to find the factory amplifier. What we have to do is figure out how the factory radio is communicating with it. That's important because we need to know whether we're gonna go before the amplifier or after the amplifier. This is what's gonna tell us what we have to sell the customer in order to do the integration. Are we gonna need to find something that is capable of manipulating 10 channels of sound, or is it just 6 preamps out of the radio? And by preamps I mean variable voltage, not an actual RCA. There will be no RCAs in any car. Don't get your hopes up. In a Honda, the factory amplifier is typically mounted over here behind the glove box or somewhere in the driver's footwell. So with a little bit of time and effort, we've located the factory amplifier. In typical Honda fashion, it is up here in the dash, but they did move it into a different location from previous Honda Accords. But that's okay because we knew we were gonna have to take a little bit more apart than necessary just to get to a couple of the other things we needed to get to, specifically ANC, or automatic noise canceling. Hondas love to do that, and we're going to need to disable it in order to put a system in here. Here's how you know you have it. That little dot right there in the ceiling, that is a microphone. That's for the ANC. Now if you pull your glove box out, this guy right here, and you look right there, that silver box, this one, that is your ANC module. To disable it, reach up from behind, it's got a clip, push down on it and unplug it. That's over with now, you don't have to worry about it. You can move on with the installation. What we're looking for is that guy right there. That's the factory amplifier. Now in order to get to this, well, you had to jump through a couple hoops. Specifically, you want to start with obviously removing the glove box, loosening up this panel here by pulling out the air vent. There's no screws that hold this in place, but this pocket here has 4 screws. You're going to want to unplug those. To get to those screws, you simply just pull up the center console and unplug it. Once these two pieces are out, now I will tell you, getting the USB unplugged from this, pain in the butt, very short. That's why you want to unplug this, so you can have room to see how to unplug it. It helps to have a friend. I would definitely not do this by yourself. You need it, Fernando, to get to these. because someone has to hold all this stuff. Next, remove the center console. To do that, there is a panel clip located here, a screw located here, and then inside, underneath this, there's 2 10s there, and then in the very back, you pull off the air conditioner and there's 2 more 10s located here. Then the whole thing will come out and you can set it aside. If you're thinking it's smart to unplug the battery in this car, I'm gonna tell you right now, it's okay, you can do it. However, when you connect the battery back up, you have to be ready to drive the car. If you're not, don't hook the battery back up. Once you pull the battery cable in this car for an extended period of time, putting it back on, the car needs to reset itself. In order to do that, it needs to be driven. If you don't drive it, you're going to get a Christmas tree of lights that appears in your gauge cluster, and it's going to be very scary. Very scary. If you're silly enough and you're watching this, you're going, that happened to me. What do I do? Simple enough, just disconnect the battery, let the car sit in order to reset 10 or 15 minutes. When you put the battery back on, it's gonna come up and say drive the vehicle. Drive the vehicle. It's like 100 yards maybe, and it'll reset the car and everything will be functioning properly. The other thing too to not do in this car is poke wires through the factory grommet. Don't do that. Drill your own hole. These wires in these cars are super tiny thin, and I don't know. I've read so many articles where people have had nothing but problems doing it, so we don't do that. We drill a hole. But yeah, okay, back to the amplifier. To access the amplifier, you have to go through the driver's side. And there it is. Right off the bat, I can see what I was dreading. This first connector here. This is my digital input on this amplifier. That tells me right away, we're not gonna be going before the amplifier. Everything we do is gonna have to be after the amplifier. So I'm gonna need a big multi-channel processor or high level to low level adapter in order to integrate into this. This guy right here is the new digital input that Honda is using for their vehicles. They have it in the Civic, and now they have it in the Accord, which only makes sense because the Civic is cheaper than the Accord, so you would think the more expensive car would have it. We kind of figured that was gonna be the case here, but we have to check to make sure. Now that means that changes our whole thought process on doing this. And the reason why this video is so important is because a lot of people like to buy things before they actually know what they're getting into. Prime example is this car. This customer went online and bought all the cool things that he thought he would need in order to put a stereo in the car, specifically the DSR1. The DSR1 is a great product if you use it properly. It has 4 channels of input. That's it. It's also AR compatible. This car is not AR compatible. There's no amplifier integration for this car yet, as of time of filming. So that means this guy is not going to work for this car because we have to go after the amplifier, which means we've got 10 channels of audio that we need to integrate into. Now that we have a course of action we have to take in that we're going after the amplifier, we need to test the speaker outputs to make sure it actually has 10 channels of audio. Even though the build sheet for the car says 10 channels, that might not necessarily be right. They could be lying. They could have some crazy idea what 10 channels of audio actually is. So we have a polarity tester here that's going to make that pop, pop, pop sound into the factory harness, and then Fernando is going to use the polarity checker so we can accomplish 2 things at once here. We can figure out what speaker wire is which and which one is the positive and the negative. This is called a PT9A. It has a switch on it that will power up these leads. I could put those into the plug and it will give us the tone. What do you got?
So that will be positive.
That's correct? First wire on this plug is going to be on the outside. It is a red-black, and that is the subwoofer. Now we're just going to work our way across. Center?
Yes, positive.
So in this car we have an 18-pin plug that has the power for the amplifier and all the speakers except for the rear deck tweeters, which are on this little 8-pin plug here. And as far as like making sense of what's positive and negative, yeah, it's not really doing that. Anytime we do these, we definitely go in and check because it's not like it goes positive, negative, positive, negative. In this case, it goes positive, negative, negative, positive, you know, and it just kind of moves around. Like in this case, the woofer is over under, and then the rest of them are side by side. When you're doing one of these, if you strip this back and look for these twisted pairs, it does make your job a little bit easier. That way you can come into the plug and see which one is the twisted pair. I don't think I've ran into too many factory cars that don't twist the speaker wires like this for noise reduction. But in this case, in fact, it does have 10 channels of output. So that puts us into a really interesting spot. If he wants to use a DSP, there's only a few DSPs that will actually integrate into this. as well as a few summing devices, because we really have to look at the outputs here. At the end of the day, to go into a DSP, you really just need a left and right full frequency input. However, in a lot of these cars now, especially when you have 10 channels of output, there's things like all pass filters, which are phase correction done in a group of frequencies. So when you sum things together, it can create a problem. There can also be time alignment done in certain cases. And there again, when you're grouping things together, that can become a problem. And then you have where the sound is coming from for the car. So for example, backup sensors, Bluetooth, navigation, side lane departure warnings, and all the stuff like that. Those come through specific speakers. So that can be a problem. If you have backup sensors in the back of your car that come out of, let's say, the left and right rear speaker, and all you're using is the front speakers in order to power up a DSP, an easy solution is to do what we call channel for channel, meaning whatever the channel output is, put an amp on it, you're good to go. In this case, you'd use 10 channels of amplification. Yeah, but everything goes where it needs to go. Next step is throw the RTA on this, do a little bit more testing, and see what's coming out of each channel. In some cases, you might get lucky and there might be passive crossovers, so they're running a full frequency into that speaker and they're just using a passive crossover in order to actively cross it over, in which case you're back to 4-channel audio again. Let's keep going. For testing with the RTA, we're going to use the PAA3 handheld RTA. This is going to allow us to look at the signal coming out of the amplifier. We're going to be playing a mono pink noise because what we need to see is if we can sum the tweeter and the mid-range together. We have to plug the amplifier back in, and we're going to be using some test probes to pair up the outputs. We're also going to be using this device right here. This is an Educar phase summer. This is going to allow us to feed the tweeter and the mid-range into the RTA so that we can look at what it's doing. So how this feeds in, we have our positive negative tweeter, our positive negative mid-range. They both come into here. This has 2 switches on it, and of course our display here will show us the signal coming out of it. We have tweeter, we have mid, and we have both. And this here, this is a problem. That's telling us when we sum the two together, we're gonna get a null, because that's right about where we want to cross the tweeters over at, which is 3200. The factory tweeter in this is crossed over obscenely high. It looks like the slope starts at about 8,000, which is like ridiculous. What we want to try now is just flipping the polarity output into the summer here and see if that fixes the problem. We have mid-range, tweeter, we have what looks like a full range output. So now we know if we want to sum, that's to take the tweeter and the mid-range and add them together to get a much bigger frequency output. We just have to feed our source with the tweeter backwards. That kind of plays in hand with what we were talking about earlier when the manufacturers sometimes wire these up backwards. That's what that does. Now what we need to find out is where the sensors in this car play through. Do the backup sensors come out of the speakers like we talked about? Where all this stuff is happening, door chimes, that kind of thing. We need to figure out where that's coming through so we can properly assess how we're going to get signal out of this radio into the amplifiers and make sure everything still does what it needs to do. Right now we're testing to see where the door chime is coming from, and the easiest way to do that is just turn the car off, leave the headlights on, and then listen for the weed eater in the background that's making a whole bunch of noise. So we can hear it coming from somewhere in the dash. We've unplugged the output of the amplifier, so we know it's not coming from any of our speakers. So we're good there. We don't have to worry about where that's coming from. It's not coming from the amp. Now I'm gonna go behind the car. Fernando's gonna put it in reverse, and we're gonna see where the backup sensors are coming from.
So it's the same
Same speaker?
the same dash speaker.
The backup sensors are coming out of that same speaker that's hidden in the dash that the headlight warning was coming out of. The last thing we want to test is the GPS and see where that's coming from.
Please drive to highlighted route.
She's definitely coming out of the center channel located behind the screen. So that means that the center channel is definitely gonna have to stay in some form or another, whether just for that or integrated in some other way. So recap what we know so far. One, we know that the chimes and the backup sensors play through some form of a speaker hidden in the dash and have nothing to do with the audio. We know that the navigation only plays through the center channel. We also know he's using CarPlay, so that might not be a big issue for us. If we're doing a DSP that has an aux input, we could always feed the audio from the center channel into the aux. Depending on what expectations he has for this, meaning is he just doing a loud system of not really too concerned with like time alignment and stuff like that, we could just maybe leave the center channel playing in the system. It's going to be playing lower than the rest of the channels, so that might not be an issue. Really just depends on what the goal is at the end. If we are trying to do time alignment and give it a one-person car, meaning that when you're sitting in the driver's seat it sounds like there's a fake center channel and all that stuff stuff is going on, well, then that's a totally different story. Then we want to make sure that that center channel isn't playing. Or we have to make sure the DSP we have has an input for that center channel, and we just retain the factory tune. If we're going to do that channel for channel system, we would want to make sure there was a channel there for the center channel to play. Right now though, the only thing he has for this car, he bought a 4-channel amplifier to power everything because he thought he was going to do a DSR1. What to do, what to do. So there's a couple ideas running through my head. If we want to retain using the DSR1, we don't need the rear speaker output for anything because they don't do anything other than play sound. So we don't actually have to feed the rears into the processor. That just leaves us 4 channels of front to sum together and a subwoofer. Now we could do that with the DSR1 and an external summing device where we take the tweeters and the mid-range, sum those together, give us a 2-channel output, use those to feed channel 1 and 2, and then use the subwoofer to feed channels 3 and 4. That would allow us then to go into the DSR1 software and select front, rear, sub, and get us a 6-channel audio. We could use his existing equipment. The only thing we'd have to add to it is just the summing device. Another thought would be if we want to retain the balance fader from the factory radio, then we'd need something like an LC8i so that we could feed in all 8 channels of audio to create 4 channels of output. From those 4 channels of output, we would end up having 6 channels because you'd have the subwoofer, or 5 channels if you're including the subwoofer, and 6 channels if you're going to include the center channel. So that would be like stacking an LC8i on top of a DM608. Or you have a 10-channel DSP. That would put you into an Audison bit product that has 12 channels of input. The Alpine has 6 channels of input, which would allow us to do some weird things. So this is just going to kind of rack my brain for a little bit. There's lots of options we have. What to do? We've come up with a solution that's going to work perfectly for what we're going to do. Let's head over to the bench and I'll explain it to you. This is the Alpine PXE0850S. This is a 6-channel input DSP with 12 channels of output, and it has a built-in 8x25 watt amplifier, which is going to come in very handy for what we're trying to do. It's controlled by a Windows machine and also an app. It has a DRC that mounts in the dash. There is a full review of this on the channel. Well, let's take a look at the software and we'll explain how we're going to do this. So here's your 12 channels of input. Down here is the option for your input mixer. That's this guy right here. As we said, it has 6 channels of input. So what we're going to use is the 2 front tweeters, the 2 front mid-range, the center channel, and the subwoofer. And those are going to feed all 12 channels. Now we're going to do this kind of backwards because we want to use that 8x25 watt amplifier to do some work for us. We're going to use it to power up our center channel as well as our rear tweeters and then our rear 2 mid-range. To set it up, channel 1 and 2 are going to be our tweeters. For the rear, you come to the drop-down menu and you select rear, select left, and then it gives you the option to select tweeter, mid-range, or full. In this case, we've selected tweeter. We mirror that on channel 2. Then we come over to our input mixer, and this is where that high-level input comes from. High-level 1 will be the tweeter. High-level 2 will be the mid-bass. We'll feed both of those into that channel. On channel 2, we'll feed channels 3 and 4, which will be the passenger tweeter and mid-bass. Come down to channel 9, and we're going to repeat the process. Channel 10 will repeat the process for the other side. 11 and 12 are going to be our mid-bass for the front, because these are RCA outputs, and 3 and 4 will be our rear mid outputs, and they'll do the same thing, be fed off of 3 and 4 and 1 and 2. Channel 7 is our subwoofer, which is going to be fed off of the high level input channel 6. Channel 5 is going to be fed off our high level channel 5 input, which is the center channel. Now these have sliders so that we can mix those things in. If we want to turn down our center channel input, we can. When we switch back to EQ, down on the bottom here, it gives us the ability to set up our crossover. Since each channel is going to have a speaker on it, this is going to be what's called full active. So we can set our tweeter crossover point, our mid-range crossover point, a bandpass for our center, our sub, front tweeter, rear mid, and we can do those all through here. For this, that's a wonderful thing because it's going to save us a ton of room. He's going with the Rockford T-Class amplifiers, which are fairly small. He's going with 3 of these, two 750.1 and a have 400.4. The 400.4 is what we're gonna use to power the front speakers. The rear speakers obviously don't need as much power. That's why we're gonna use the amplifier in this to power them. The crossovers are just as big as the amplifier. So by going full active like this, we don't have to mount them in the car. It's gonna save us a lot of room because this guy is bigger than the DSR1 that was originally gonna go in here. We've come up with a solution for this problem. Whew. A lot of work, right? These are the problems that we run into on a daily basis. That's why sometimes when you guys ask us, what do I need to do for this car? And we go, honestly, we don't know. You have to test it. That's why we make these videos showing you how to test it. Now, I understand some of the tools that we use you might not have access to. I understand that. Now, if you want to make yourself like an RTA like we used here, if you head over to Kicker's website, in their support tab, they have a bunch of like how to do things. And one of those is how to make an RTA that you can do line level testing on like that by using just a high level to low level adapter, a mic cable, and an iPad. You can make that for like under $100. So this video, hopefully it'll show you why you just don't want to go out and buy things right away. Do the testing first. I've had people tell me they don't want to start taking their car apart before they do the installation. They only want to do it once. Well, if you don't know what you're doing, sometimes taking it apart beforehand will save you money. He wasted the money to buy the DSR1. Now he's got to buy the Alpine. Make sure to do your research first, and if that involves taking your car apart and doing some testing, by all means, take your car apart, do some testing. It's your car, it's your money, have fun with it. Be smart. That's today's video. We just wanted to show you the process it takes. If you want to see this car done, I'm going to recommend heading over to our Instagram channel. There we take a look at what we were doing throughout the day. This one will definitely be up there. So head over there, check it out. Now, if you missed the 5 minutes with 5-star, we do the 5 minutes with 5-star recap. It either appears Sunday or Monday. You can go through there and check and see how the car actually turned out. That's the end of this one today, though. Fernando.
On to the next one, guys.
You guys have a great time. We'll see you later next time.